of July 19 was just awesome. We were celebrating our 70th year, and the show that was put on that morning, I thought was one of the best that had ever been put together.
Dealers were excited, customers were excited, the weather was nice.
There was energy. We were going to launch, a new product. We were going to release it for the first time, showing it to our customers.
Over 400 customers and dealers here, and people were having fun.
I remember standing in the back, and it just made me so excited for the future, but also so incredibly proud of all of the people that made that day happen. I left that morning feeling like Vermeer was as strong as it had ever been. The team behind Vermeer was as strong as it had ever been, and that our future was limitless.
So that's how the day started, and really, we had a remarkable day before the tornado hit.
Today, 86 degrees, some scattered storms, isolated chance here in the metro still left, and we'll have severe chances mainly eastern part of Iowa. It could be strong to severe storms with everything on the table as far as damaging wind, hail, heavy rain, and even an isolated tornado is possible. Taking a look at 8 p.m. tonight, the bulk of it is going to be up in north central Iowa.
So the afternoon, we were out in the demo site. We were spending time with a lot of our key customers, some of our corporate accounts, really going deeper on some discussion, talking about new products. Just a very, fun time. And we started to get reports that there's risk of the weather turning.
I was in the founder's house, and it had been a nice day. I certainly wasn't thinking about a tornado at all. And somebody came and said, hey, just so you know, there is a tornado warning. And I immediately took out my phone and pulled up a radar. As a pilot, I am often looking at radar to try to figure out what the weather is doing, and definitively said it's going to miss us to the north. Convinced of it.
I was downstairs in Steve Flan's office, and our discussion centered around, okay, we have as many as 400 guests on site. If the tornado alarm sounds, do we have a good plan? And so we talked through who would do what and when and where we would take our guests. Some of our guests either don't speak English or probably had never experienced a tornado. That added to a bit of unrest that we had.
As soon as we start to get indication of any severe weather, like our team is looking at multiple radars, and we have the National Weather Service dropping emails to us and phone calls, as well as alerts from a third-party vendor. And whenever a storm is within 7.5 miles of Vermeer, it will send us notification. That notification, whether it's a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning or even a watch, is how we trigger our alarm system.
The new tornado warning there is now encompassing Mahaska, Marion County, Sully, Monroe. You're issued in that one. And then this tornado...
At 3:37, the warning hit my email, and our security officer called, and we got the warning as well from our third party. And I said, put them all in shelter. And so we sounded our alarms at 3:38, I think, and put everyone in shelter.
The weather seemed good. As we looked out to the west, it's like, is this a drill, or this surely is not too serious here? And so I went around here outside of my office and gathered everybody up.
And so we said to everyone, okay, we need to go downstairs, and there are tornado shelters in the restrooms and also in the kitchen, and we need to find a place. And then once we were in the shelter, it was sort of like, is this going to hit or not? And customers were asking, so what's a tornado exactly?
So from there, I drove out and just kind of took our security vehicle around the perimeter of basically north of the pavilion, but along the perimeter, and just made sure people were getting inside that weren't already. And then I sat on the concrete sales pad for a while and just kind of watched, which wasn't a normal thing.
We started to see lots of our customers coming into the pavilion. We showed them where the different shelters were that they could get into place. So Doug and I were also just chatting, and I remember making the comment and said, seems like there's something about our location that serves us well in tornadoes, that they, for some reason, they can't keep that power up as they come over the lake. And Doug looked at me that day and he said, never say never.
And it was interesting because one of our team members had picked up some of the pastries over in the galley area and taken it into the shelter so people might have a little coffee time. Coffee was in the kitchen. So, you know, I mean, it was kind of a festive mood, to be honest with you.
Periodically, Sue would come in and assure everybody that, oh, this happens in Iowa all the time. They'll sound the all clear any minute, and then we can go back about our business.
We all have been through drills and/or warnings in the past, and nothing has come of those. And after a few minutes, you'll be released to get back to the business of the day. And that was the expectation that day as well.
At that point, by 3:54, we've been in the shelter 17 minutes. And so it's always hard because you think you're probably safe, and this is probably gonna be nothing, so it's gonna feel like it was wasted time.
So at this point, I have a number of people in this kitchen who I'm with, including 2 women from Malta who barely speak English, who are hot and they keep fanning themselves and they just wanna step outside, and we keep saying no, and so I'm texting Billy, hey man, like, how much longer?
We just kept saying, yep, we're still under warning.
I go into the Plant 1 corporate office shelter, and I remember getting a text from my wife that said, the TV is saying that it is 11 miles away from Vermeer. And I thought, 11 miles away? And so I went outside to see what it looked like. And I looked to the north, and it was definitely dark. I mean, you could tell that there was weather to the north, but I didn't see any evidence that a tornado was anything close to imminent. My wife texted me again and said, now the TV is saying it's 3 miles from Pella. And I thought, what? I cannot believe this. So I went outside again and looked to the north, and this time I could tell it was pretty dark to the north. So I was continually looking at my radar and feeling like it was gonna be closer than what I had thought, but still convinced it was gonna miss us to the north and glide to the east.
And then at 4:05 is when we got a notification from our third-party service that said that the warning had expired for Marion County and that we could resume normal operations. Normally when we would get that, it would be a no-brainer. We'd turn off the severe weather alert and we'd turn on our all clear chimes. But I had pictures of a tornado when we're getting that all clear.
There it is.
So it was a really easy decision.
Not long after that, I got a text from my wife, and she said, now the TV is saying that it's a mile from Vermeer. And at this point, I was willing to admit it's gonna be closer than I thought.
Still, I didn't even think we'd get a drop of rain from this storm. I thought it was just gonna keep moving. I'm on the phone with our security officer who's saying that I don't think it's very strong. And I said, it doesn't seem that way either, basically, but I think I said, I feel like it just turned at us. And that's when it really was very clear to me that it was gonna come right for campus. I think at 4:09 or something like that, I turned around and left that sales site area. And the tornado basically followed me back to the pavilion. 4:11, 4:12-ish is when it started to hit campus.
Attention please. A severe weather warning has been issued. Please take cover immediately.
So it looks like the most dangerous part of the storm has just scooted past the Pella area. It is now right here, folks. Put it right on there. Highway 102 and north of 163, that is where the main area of rotation is. Jason Sadeko out chasing.
Everybody kind of got into shelter. I went into the women's bathroom right in our kind of pavilion entryway. And there were probably 15 or so people in the bathroom. And we were probably in there for about 5 minutes, and then the lights went out.
We lost electricity, and I remember a few people were trying to peek through that crack in the kitchen doors. And I remember hearing, there it is, it's coming. And so everybody kind of hunkered down or crouched to try to take shelter, even more so. And as it came, wind suctioned out the doors of the pavilion, and then it ultimately blew open the kitchen doors.
Literally, the doors of the kitchen blew out, and it felt like we were being pulled out.
The second those doors slammed open and wind is blowing in and people are screaming, and you can hear like glass shattering, you could hear that happening, you could hear screaming, obviously there was terror. Just at that moment, you don't know what's happening. So we just held in that corner.
That's the closest I've ever been to being in a tornado.
Once those lights went out, it was natural that everybody got down. I found myself tucked below the sinks, and Allison Van Weingarten was next to me, and we prayed because it felt like something had changed. And as we were down and we were praying, and there were a few others with us, our pressure in our ears just filled. And glass started, you could hear glass breaking, you could hear doors opening, you could hear people not screaming, but there was panic in the air that something had changed.
You know, it really was very scary because everybody knew that this was real, this is serious. So it got deadly quiet. I think some people were, just quiet. I think a lot of people were praying. Everybody was just really concerned and scared because it was here. Everybody kind of knew it.
Just remember hoping and kind of praying, like, don't let this be some sort of catastrophic thing where we lose somebody.
In the Plant 1 shelter, we had no pressure differential in our ears. We didn't hear any noises. There was no rattling, just the lights flickered twice. So not long after that, I was standing next to Shelly, who is the security guard for Plant 1, and she had a radio, and we started hearing voices over the radio saying, the roof is off, windows are out, we have injuries. And that's when just the attitude changed dramatically.
There was people trying to report any injuries, damage, and it was such a high volume, I didn't always know who it was that was speaking. And so then eventually we tried to go like, all right, Plant 1 report what was happening. There was nothing there, nothing at 2, nothing at 3. And then we got to 6 and 7, and that's when we were able to really understand kind of the picture. I didn't know what to expect when I walked outside. And so I was kind of like bracing for, like, it's gonna look different. It's gonna look like nothing that most of us have never seen. But I kind of needed to be able to ignore that and not get caught up in that for the role that I knew I was gonna have to play.
So I left the shelter, and as I was walking through the atrium, I distinctly saw multiple police cars driving through the four-way stop and along the mile. And I just remember thinking, that is phenomenal. I can't believe that they are here this quickly.
There's a first responder call down verse 7. At that point, it was Vince and I kind of ran out of the shelter, and when I hit the door, it was already sunny again. Things didn't look out of place as I exited the plant and ran out toward this truck. What I remember was we jumped in Vince's truck and he put it in reverse, and we could hear him run over something. We're like, oh, what was that? And we backed up and he ran over a bucket. And I remember this vividly. But, you know, he kind of took off. And at that point, we really didn't know the seriousness. And we actually took a path from the north end of the plant up to the south, and we came around the corner of the PDC. It wasn't until that moment when we turned the corner and saw just the complete devastation in our front parking lots that it all kind of came rushing in.
We stepped out, and you could look in the parking lot, and things looked kind of normal just in the parking lot, except there was this one little motorized cart that we have, and it was just kind of in the middle of the parking lot and sideways. And Steve said, "Huh, I bet somebody didn't park that there." I thought, yeah, that's kind of crazy. And then we got in his car, which was just right outside the pavilion, and he unlocked the doors, and we get in and notice there's broken glass in his front seat. So Steve just wipes it into a styrofoam coffee cup he had, and wiped it off and just set it in the cup holder, and we got in and started driving. Like, when you look back, you would think these are big things, but instead we just kept going. It was intense.
I remember there was the one car sitting there, and it was a small car, and it had a 2x4 sticking directly out of one of the headlights. It reminded me of the biblical passage about having a plank in your eye, and that's what it looked like. But I'd never known what that really looked like. Well, there it was.
The first thing you couldn't miss was, you know, literally a pile of 3 cars, you know, with one kind of upright. That was the first thing, you know, turning the corner that I saw. And so, you know, then you kind of know, okay, this is something really devastating just kind of happened here.
So we drove and started going along the back, and you know, saw very little damage. Of course, there really wasn't any for plants 1, 2, 3, and part center. And then we started seeing the incredible damage. The first thing that I remember seeing was part of the roof off of 4, and saying, there's where part of the roof is off. And you know, that, in my mind at that point, that was where the roof was off. And so, hey, there's a little bit of damage there. And we're going and saw a little bit more damage at 4. And then I saw to my left that the eco center was completely obliterated. And that is when it started to become clear just how much damage there was.
I jump out of my vehicle, just trying to comprehend and understand how I can help. And you could hear gas lines go off, you could hear water lines go off, and I thought, wow, this is real, because the eco center was pretty flat, and you would see off to the left people kind of being very calm, outside of corporate tests, looking at their vehicles, trying to maybe see if their vehicles are drivable. You would see people kind of running. You'd see people asking, you know, how can they help? What can they do? And I remember what people's faces, and I'm sure mine as well, it was just overwhelming. I can't really say anything more than that.
So, you know, we're just absorbing this shock. And then as we keep going, we started seeing the incredible damage to plants 5 and plant 6. And you know, my first visuals were that more or less the entire north walls of plants 5 and 6 were caved in. The roof was significantly off. And as we're driving, and I'm looking into the backs of these buildings, there is a 12-foot geyser of water. I see one of those in both plant 5 and plant 6. And you know, at this point, I've seen the pile of rubble that the eco center was. I see the pile of rubble where these north walls have caved in, and I think there have to be fatalities. And that thought was so hard, and the damage was so hard to see.
There was a big number 9 on the ground. And I thought, a 9? That's weird. Then I realized, oh, it's the number off the big number from the front of plant 6, and it's upside down. And I remember taking a picture of that thinking, you know, everything's upside down.
About that point, I had heard from Jason that 5 and 6 were unbelievable. Just prepare yourself for what you're going to see. And so it was just almost a surreal time. Is this really happening? Pastor Kevin Corver from 3rd had watched the hit, I guess, on Vermeer and came immediately. And there he was walking around just seeing people and praying. And I just said to him, you know what, I'm so fearful of loss of life. So that was my great concern, and of course, at that point, we still didn't know what the situation was.
I noticed they were spreading a big tarp on the grass. I asked somebody, what's that for? They said it was for triage if there were bodies. And I thought, that's when it hit me that, you know, this could be really bad.
I will never forget that scene. As I drove through the mile in that first look, I thought we had a huge crisis on our hands.
I went over to plant 7, and I remember in that short period between the pavilion and 7, just being overwhelmed, thinking there was going to be obviously significant risk of injury or worse, and just how overwhelming that felt.
Loss of life was kind of at the forefront of my mind. Like, I didn't want anybody to come upon somebody, especially like, you know, a friend, anybody that had died. Like, I didn't want that for anybody. I didn't want anyone to have to like carry that burden.
You could start to smell gas in the air a little bit. You could, you see water spraying up from the top of 5, and at that point you knew things were pretty serious, but didn't know, if anyone was hurt, where are people at. And people were just starting to filter out, and it was a kind of like a scene of chaos because they'd just been through something traumatic.
Some were yelling, some were screaming, some were just incredibly calm and just had disbelief, not knowing what had happened. Some of them, I'm confident, were also gone through some trauma.
Certainly there was shock, but it was also under control. Our emergency people that are trained on staff, I think, immediately took control of the situation. They were tending to those that were injured, and then they were shepherding those that weren't out. It was just so impressive because it's just not only the Vermeer culture, the Vermeer training, but our care for people that just came alive at that moment.
We got a gas leak in there. We're trying to get it shut down.
At that point, it just switched to, we got to figure out a plan about, where to direct people to go and just get people away.
I was told that we needed to evacuate the mile, so I walked back towards the back of Plant 3, and anybody that I came across, I said, you need to evacuate the mile. Came across one lady in particular that was pretty distraught. Took a couple minutes to calm her down, and once she was taken care of, then I walked towards the pavilion, knowing that that's where most of the customers had congregated. We had a couple groups from Italy, groups from Germany, and so getting those groups together, doing a head count, ensuring that they were all accounted for, and then assisting them in getting off the mile and back to their hotels was one of the first orders of business, to just understand that everybody was accounted for.
I offered to go to the hospital, and we took a while to get around and to the hospital, and to see what the hospital had put in place based on what may have happened got pretty real pretty quick. Directing traffic, probably 40 wheelchairs lined up. We walk in, there's 10 or 12 clergy and pastors there ready to help. Everybody was gowned up, and you know, it made me just a little weak for a minute to realize that that's what we could be dealing with. So just appreciative that we have that emergency management type passionate people that were there to help.
At this point, I knew that emergency responders were in with dogs, and at that point, I feared that we would soon hear, we found a body or we found some bodies.
They made the call to get dogs down because we were so uncertain about not only our facilities, but like the piles of cars and the uncertainty of if there's somebody in that rubble.
We started to get early reports that we believe we had isolated those that were injured and those were being treated. I hadn't heard that anybody was significantly injured yet. I didn't know, but I was just taking that as, okay, this first step, it's good news.
So came back to corporate, and I emailed everybody from exec team and said, anybody who's in Pella, meet at our command center in what we call the exec team conference room. There were two major things that we were doing just an hour after the tornado. HR started developing a plan for how we were going to try to account for as many people as we possibly could that could have been in one of the most seriously damaged plants. And then we started, a remarkable plan which carried out over weeks. How are we going to inform our team members?
We knew we just had to start talking to our team members. It was important to us that we only share what we know, but we have to start sharing.
And we knew we wanted to give a pretty comprehensive message on obviously the current state, but also the confidence of how we move forward, and almost get back in some ways to that excitement for our future. What we had felt that morning could come back even that night, but in a very different way.
And then I think it was 8 o'clock that I went and did a press briefing.
I was down at the copier on the second floor waiting for a copy of his speech to come out, and the public relations manager at Pella Regional sent me a text and said, "Hey, everyone's released." And I remember thinking, this couldn't be better timing.
The 7 minor injuries had already been released from the hospital, so that was incredible news that we had only had minor injuries.
So we changed that, and we got Jason ready, and we brought him in front of the media.
Basically read it for the first time as I was driving from corporate headquarters over to the pavilion to do the press briefing, and read the prepared statement and felt like I was building confidence that I was going to at least be able to get words out. And then the local reporter asked me, the question about, from a personal perspective and a family perspective, and, started to get emotional. So yeah, we certainly are going to rebuild, and we're going to come back stronger than ever. And that was just an off-the-cuff statement, but it's what I was feeling. In my mind already at that point, I wasn't 99% sure we were going to rebuild. I was 100%. There was not one bit of doubt in my mind that we would rebuild and come back better and stronger than ever.
Several of us watched Jason live, from inside the executive team room, and seeing Jason emotional, a scene that you don't normally expect to ever see. I mean, it got pretty quiet from us there for a few minutes, and then certainly the start of the rally.
That moment in the media was just kind of this turning point of, he believes it, we believe it.
His conviction in us and what we could do collectively was so strong that night. And I think that gave all of us that confidence in ourselves and in our collective team to go out and do what was ahead of us.
We got back and I checked my email, and one of our graphic designers out of nowhere had sent me this image, Vermeer Strong. And he had said, I wasn't in Pella today, but I've been watching the news nonstop, and I just saw Jason's press conference, and so I just wanted to share this. So we posted it, and it took off.
And what was fun about that is that it kind of self-rallied people. You know, it wasn't immediately that we needed to hear something that rallied us. We felt it.
We're a strong team. So Vermeer Strong, that theme really hit home with everyone.
At the end of the day, we're here to create jobs and to affect households and communities and to make our customers more profitable. That's what we do. But we had a lot of work to do.
Just a few days ago, we took a direct hit from the most powerful tornado to strike Iowa in more than 3 years. And the thing I will always be most happy about, most proud about, is that we did not have a single serious injury. The shareholders were so concerned about our people. We really set our desires to get everyone back to work within 45 days. And then to reestablish more than 95% of our production footprint. So we knew we had big challenges.
There is no playbook that exists that you know, how do you recover 2 plants, 30% of your capacity lost overnight? It doesn't exist. At that point, you're relying on the people, the culture.
It's your culture that really makes a difference.
The tornado just tested that culture. You know, did we really believe people are our most important asset? Yes, we really do.
It was never a discussion about profit, loss, any of that. It was really people, customers, dealers. And if we took care of those things, then Vermeer would be okay.
Our heart's in Pella, and we love the work ethic here. We love the values. We love our history and past.
It's Vermeer Strong, and we'll do whatever it takes to come out of this as quick as we can.
That first month, things just could not have gone better. To have all of our people back to work within a month was something I'm so proud of. And then to reestablish more than 95% of our production footprint within 45 days was awesome. We benefited from just the tremendous work ethic and the Vermeer Strong attitude that our people have. And the long-term future is bright. And it's because of tremendous company, a tremendous heritage, wonderful team members to have the opportunity to work with. We took a hit, but we're Vermeer Strong, and we're gonna come back better than ever.